DJC Productions proudly presents The Dusty Cover Show. Hear the inside story from today's authors, plus free chapter downloads. Kindly promoted by Lady Lake Artist Promotion and Publicity for artists and bands in the US and UK. And now, here's Dusty Cover.
Welcome to my very first Dusty Cover Show, and thank you for all my friends for tuning in, promoting and supporting the show. As a thank you, my producer, Douglas Coleman, is offering a prize draw of a $20 Amazon voucher to be drawn amongst my very first 100 followers, so click and follow me now for a chance to win. I am Dusty Cover, and I live in Oxford, England with my Springer Spaniel, Mandy, and I also am the author of 4 books, the Paradox Child series and Garden, which is published by Autumn Orchard. My Paradox Child series is free to download today in all countries, so just go to Amazon and click and download. You don't need a Kindle, as you can download the app for free onto your computer and read it anywhere, even on your phone. The Dusty Cover Show will be about sharing my love of books and discovering the story behind them, chatting to modern day authors who write them. My first guest, Ed Drury, is a multi-talented author, composer, teacher and instrument maker. Classically trained on the trumpet, Ed traded his trumpet for an electric guitar and was a well-known session musician on the West Coast for the better part of the 1970s. Today he combines his experience with classical music and his love for traditional music forms by composing music inspired by his world travels and his training as a healer. We'll be chatting to Ed in a bit, but the first song of the show is Running in Circles by Villa Avenue. Villa Avenue, who are one of my favourite bands, are an original rock band from Chicago, Illinois. This song features Chris on vocals, Jason on drums and John on bass. Running in Circles, promoted by Lady Lake Promotions.
with like the extra guitars in the beginning. Like, it sounds kind of cool.
I'd like to welcome an author who I'm a huge fan of because I've read his amazing book and was totally enchanted by the wonderful characters and dreamlike images and states that he visualized when he wrote it. And I was reading it alone, but I felt so sort of caught up in the story that I felt a part of it and became really quite emotional about the characters and what was happening to them. And I think this is a real trait of a true author. So I'm very honoured to welcome Ed Drury to my show, The Dusty Cover, and he will just going to tell you about the book I was talking about, because I pronounced it wrong earlier, and I want you to all know what it's called because it's so wonderful. So please could you say that, Ed?
Thank you, Jane. The book is called The Whale Whisperers of Ensorclia, and it's actually the first book of a trilogy of books about these people who are the whale whisperers, and they live on a continent. The continent of Ensorclia is on a planet very much like our planet, and I vision it as in the southern hemisphere of our planet and about the size of Africa.
Perhaps I could ask this question now, as soon as we're talking about that book. If it was made into a film with very similar to the Avatar film by Disney, because it's got the same sort of magical feel about it. So if it was made into a film similar to Avatar, which character would you play, Ed?
Well, I would probably play the character of Levi, who is an older gentleman like myself, and he's got a bit of an anthropologist / detective. He's very curious about these people, and he has a great love for them, and he has a great respect for the knowledge that they have. He's not naive enough to feel that he is their savior or spokesman for them or to look out for them in any way. He's just quite taken with them, and he wants to learn just as much as he possibly can about them.
Thinking he's quite a spiritual character. Perhaps more in touch with.
Yeah, I don't know spiritual, but but he is a person who is in love with another culture, and I find that the charming part of Levi, and kind of relate to that someone can fall in love across cultural boundaries and language boundaries, and actually genuinely care for their fellow creatures, even if they're not perhaps the same species, even feel a kinship that way.
What inspires you to write?
To write this books?
Well, all of your books, all of them. I know you have a new one. You're going to treat us to a small reading from it in a bit.
Okay, well, I think initially I had always promised myself, and I've told people my entire life, that when I reached a certain age, people would always say, well, what are you going to do, when you're older? And I always said, when I'm older, I want to write books much in the same spirit as Kurt Vonnegut Jr. and Mark Twain. Wow. In other words, I wanted to write whatever the hell I felt like writing, and not worry about writing for an audience or writing for money particularly. But I just felt that I had things to say, and I wanted to devote whatever time I have left here to saying it. I found them to be much more intelligent than I, but also I found their humor and humility about their insights very appealing as well. That kind of inspired me to write and try and find my voice, to do it with humor, especially humility.
You were just talking about Mark Twain, and
those were my big heroes growing up.
I believe he's an American writer, isn't he?
Yes, both those writers I mentioned are American.
So, and were you born in America?
Yes.
Yes. Whereabouts, and where do you call your home?
In Portland, Oregon.
Right.
And whenever I've traveled and I tell people that I'm from the U.S., they assume that I'm from Los Angeles or New York. So those are the two places you're supposed to be from. I'm actually from a rather small place in the Pacific Northwest. I was born in a small town called The Dalles, Oregon. I moved around as a child. I grew up in Seattle and Portland. I went to college in a town called Eugene, and those are all within a few hours of Portland, Oregon, where I live now. the Pacific Northwest is my home.
So I know you're going to say a bit of your story that from your new book. Could you tell us about what it is and maybe share a bit with us?
Okay. Well,
Thank
this
you.
book is a collection, actually, of flash fiction or microfiction, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're very short little bits. I put it together so that it'd be the kind of thing that you could read, like when you're sitting waiting for the dentist, or waiting
Yeah.
for your bus at the bus stop, and actually finish a thought. But I intended that it might provoke the reader to continue the story in their mind, and maybe so I try to leave it a bit, give them just enough to let their imagination fill out the story a bit more. Most of these were written in a matter of 5 minutes or so. I've picked out one of these little hits. It's called Fishing with Dan and David, and it's about two friends of mine who also write. But I was thinking about, and I've never met them in person. We've only communicated through emails and such, like you and I. So this is Fishing with Dan and David, if I may.
Thank you.
I dreamed that Dan and I were sitting on the banks of a stream of consciousness. We'd been fishing for words all day, but all I had caught were small ones, too small to keep. I was beginning to suspect that we had picked out a spot downstream from David again. He liked to catch all the big words and leave the little ones for everyone else. He'd tuck the words like spectrophotometry into his basket with a smirk. But more than big words, which were harder to land than they were to hook, he liked rare ones, words which, though short, were deceptively hard to reel in, words that would put up a fight with strange diphthongs, obscure origins, and often multiple meanings, words which only a handful of word fishermen really understood. My basket was filled with common words, nouns, verbs, adjectives, and the occasional common conjunction. Dan had a basket full of four-letter ones, which he liked to shake up before pulling one out and baiting his hook with it. It's how I catch the unexpected controversies, he would say with a laugh as he would cast his line towards a snag. Controversies, good one, 4 syllables. He liked to tempt the currents of fate that way. I always chose to bait my hook with a nice medium-sized pronoun like these or those. Those would always catch you an action word, which much more often than not. Meanwhile, all I could do was dream of bigger words upstream. Maybe it was time to pull in my line and move up the stream a little. So that's Fishing with Dan and David.
It's wonderful. It's really wonderful. I could listen to your voice all day because you've got such a lovely, calming, wonderful voice. And I love the idea of word fisherman. I wonder, listening to that, are you a poet as well? Because
I used to write songs when I was younger, so if that can be considered poetry.
It's definitely poetry.
Yeah.
It's definitely poetry. And I know you're a musician as well. And in a while we're going to be treated to a piece of your music, which I hope you'll introduce in a bit. So you told us now you're working on, you've just finished that, or you're working still on it at the moment?
That one is finished. I'm working on another book, which is a kind of a paranormal thriller.
Ooh, that sounds
exciting. Yes, that's the reaction that I hope to get.
Can I do it again? Ooh, wow.
Oh, thank you. It's about a fellow who probably was a fake psychic sort of person. You know, the type that appears on television and communicates with the spirits and connects you with your departed loved ones and that sort of thing. But then he meets a spirit guide who helps him become authentic. And my idea with this book was that if there was such a thing as a spirit medium who could communicate with the spirits, not all the spirits would be that fun to communicate with.
Yeah.
He starts to realize that he's communicating with people who are all the victim of the same person, a serial killer.
Wow.
So he has to navigate proving the guilt of this person without being caught up in the web of this serial killer. So that's the thriller part of it. And the paranormal part is his spirit guide, who I envisioned as his last incarnation was as a Amazonian tribesman who was a a cannibal.
Wow.
So he has the experience of all of his ancestors because he's practiced, his tribe practiced something called compassionate cannibalism, where it's cannibalism, but it's a part of their mortuary passage that they devour some of their deceased
right. Yeah.
loved, and so taking in the information that was back to the information that's never lost sort of thing that's from Whale Whisperers. But yeah, so that's what I'm working on right now.
So is your main character then, he's sort of not a genuine character at the beginning of the thing, but then he goes on a journey and believes more in the end, do you think?
I hope that people find him somewhat sympathetic. He's a nice person, really. He just doesn't have any job skills. So he had been very successful at, in the U.S. we call him snake oil salesman. His skill set would be he can convince people, he can read people really, really well, and he can tell them what they want to hear.
You said that all the ghosts that he comes across, all the spirits that he comes across, have been murdered by the same person.
Well, not all of them, but
not all of them. A lot of them, yeah. Is the person who murdered them in spirit also, or is he alive and still killing people?
We don't know.
You don't know. I'll have to read the book. When do you think that'll be finished?
I hope to have the first draft done by November.
This November?
This November, yeah.
Wow. How many books have you got now, Ed?
With the Whale Whisperer ones and the short story book, that's 4. Oh. And then I have 2 nonfiction books about that are connected with the didgeridoo.
You do sound as if you're quite interested in study of past people's cultures and even cultures today, but that are separate. Have you got any qualifications in that, or is it just a lifelong interest?
Not even a lifelong interest, but I was fortunate enough to meet some people from different cultures through music. I found it quite interesting, really. And because I played music, I had a way of communicating with and meeting people who I probably would otherwise not have met. So music is a great way to sort of share culture and share information around the world. Kind of transcends the language differences to a degree, but the languages do. What I found most interesting is how language informs musical rhythms and ideas and melodies. And if you listen to music from different cultures and have some small appreciation for the language spoken there, you can hear the connection. It begins to become quite obvious. How Latin music, for example, Latin American music is influenced both by Spanish influence and by the slave trade. That is the reality, that there's some African influence that comes from, slaves that were brought over in the settlement of the New World, as well as the indigenous tribes, and all the hundreds of languages now lost, but I think that the rhythms and melodic influences are still there to some degree. It's just, I find that part of music really quite fascinating. It's an area called ethnomusicology.
Wow.
And I find it quite interesting. And always, continuing to change as people from various parts of the world come together for different reasons.
Yeah, and because of the internet and everything and the technology, now we are all hearing much more.
Hearing more from each other,
yeah. Especially now with Periscope as well, because I'm a huge Periscope fan. I've been listening to music around the world, and it is just quite eye-opening. But what you were saying, that sounded very clever. You were saying that you can hear a piece of music and you can sort of decode perhaps the influences it's coming from. Is that what you're saying? In a way?
I don't know that I can. With practice, you can begin to pick out sort of things and go in the language, especially if you start. I'm studying Spanish now. Been very helpful with certain music. It's not necessarily Spanish music, but there are influences there. I hear it especially too in various Asian music. You hear rhythmically and melodically. If you just even scratch the surface of the language, you will hear these rhythms again, and you'll go, "Oh, I heard that, in this piece of music." Wow. And it makes you wonder and question and investigate. And you begin to see connections between samba and Portuguese, for example, and the music of Brazil. Yeah, it's a fascinating area. I'm not an expert in it by any means, but I am an avid student and admirer of it.
Yeah, it's a brand new concept for me, and but it makes total sense when you say that, because it's bound to be all connected, isn't it? And I loved how you said as well that music is a universal language. I feel that about art as well, and we're all coming at it with our own ideas and our own cultural references and everything else. So it makes it somehow unique, even though it's the same painting or the same song. We're all experiencing it slightly differently, and I think
get different things. Yes.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
also, music especially, and I think art as well, is a huge memory trigger. I think our history and our biases and all those things that seem to separate us, they also can bring us together when we're appreciating, say, the same art form or same music. The human experience, the human part of us is kind of captivated. And it becomes, as we take it in and we make it relevant to our personal story, it becomes personal to us, becomes part of our story, even though it originally had no knowledge of us or whatever, existed quite apart from us. It becomes part of us as we listen to it, and I think we grow from that sort of experience.
Perhaps this would be a good lead into you saying about you're introducing us to the piece of music that we're going to hear now. If you would do that.
Jaish is a band I was in the late 90s, and the name came from the principal two members. I and Michael Kennett was a percussionist and drummer and composer that he and I started that particular group that then grew around that. And we started it with the idea of combining the jaw harp and the didgeridoo rhythmically and exploring the potential of that. So we just took those two names and sort of made a omnom, or what do you call that, portmanteau out of it, Jaish, jaw harp and didge, mispronouncing terribly both. But the name was sort of like an albatross then around our neck, and no one understood it, and no one could spell it. And we kept the name for a long time, and then eventually, like most bands, especially in the late 90s, we went our separate ways. But I wrote that piece of music to reflect the instrumentation of that band, which was a jaw harp, didgeridoo, clarinet, and guitar. And I think you'll hear those voices in this arrangement.
Thank you very much, Ed. That was a really inspirational piece of music, and thank you for your explanation, because that added another layer of understanding. Yes, so where can people listen to some more of your music?
They can find me probably best to go to my webpage, which is www.eddrury, EDDRURY.com. And I have links there to both my music and my writing stuff.
It's been a joy talking to you, and I'm very grateful for you coming on my radio show. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. It was my pleasure. Thank you very much. So
we've come to the end of my first show. Douglas, could we have an R in that bit? Aww. Thank you, Douglas. So all we've got left to do now is to say the thank you. So first, thank you all for listening and sharing. Thanks to my friends and Cindy for the promotion. Thank you to the multi-talented guest, Ed Drury, musician and author. Don't forget you can download the first chapters of his book free from Amazon. Please also check his website for his links and follow and support him, as he is very awesome. Thank you, Douglas, for all your hard work in producing this show and for the sponsorship of the Amazon gift token giveaway. Thank you, children. I love you. Next week, we have Rosemary Johns, an inspiring author and performer. So this is the Dusty cover, closing the cover on the first show.